Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, everyone. As the director of the canteen and on behalf of the organizations that have promoted this meeting, Unicredit and Oxfam, I would like to welcome and thank the parliamentarians, academics, economists, and all attendees for accepting our invitation on such an important day.
Accettato il nostro invito per una giornata così importante.
This morning, during our study and discussion session, we will reflect on the role that tax systems can play in achieving a fair distribution of income alongside wages. With the help of some of the leading experts who have been deeply engaged in these issues at both national and international levels, we will address topics that have become particularly sensitive. The polarization of wealth, generated by all but concentrated in the hands of a small circle of ultra-billionaires, the significant rise in absolute poverty among large segments of the population, and the growing relative impoverishment of the so-called middle class, even in the most economically advanced countries, are the factors of a global social, economic, and political emergency that is particularly acute in our country. For this reason, we have invited the leaders of the major political forces who have shown particular sensitivity to these issues to speak this morning, and we thank them for their presence. In the first panel, dedicated to the international framework, we will hear from Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel laureate in economics and professor at Columbia University; Martin Guzman, former Minister of Economy of Argentina; and Jack Ghosh, a development economist. We will also have a professor of economics from the University of Massachusetts. I now have the pleasure of giving the floor to Professor Visco, who will chair the session and introduce the topic of our discussion.
First of all, I want to apologize to our guests because I'm going to speak Italian, and there is a simultaneous translation system that can help us to our public to follow our discussion.
The issue of rising inequalities is the fundamental problem of our era. It is the unfortunate and inevitable result of the long neoliberal phase. Today, we are addressing this issue in a short conference that benefits from the presence of highly competent and authoritative guests who are here taking advantage of their stay in Rome for the conference on tax justice held at the Vatican. I sincerely thank them for their availability. Inequality today is evident in incomes, in their distribution between wages and profits, in wealth, in opportunities, but also in the structure of tax systems, the crisis of welfare systems, and the growing poverty. By their nature, tax systems are not the most suitable tool for reducing inequality. In fact, if the total tax burden must reach levels of 40 to 45% of GDP, as is the case in many European countries today, it is inevitable that very high tax rates also apply to middle-class incomes. For redistributive purposes, however, the construction of welfare systems, including education, healthcare, pensions, and social assistance, after World War II was highly effective. And this is precisely the point where the right wing expresses its aversion to taxes, because taxes essentially serve to finance public spending, particularly social spending. However, unlike a few decades ago, today's tax burden is clearly regressive for the highest levels of income and wealth. This shift has occurred while the highest tax rates on personal income have been drastically reduced, corporate taxes have been halved, and taxable bases have been progressively eroded. As a result, a debate has emerged on the opportunity to introduce a wealth tax, at least for the wealthiest taxpayers. However, there remains the issue of how to implement it concretely, starting with the need for specific wealth registries, which, for example, are not available in Italy. Similarly, large multinational corporations have demonstrated an extraordinary ability to avoid taxes on profits by shifting them to low-tax countries or tax havens. To counter these behaviours, proposals from the OECD and other international organisations have been developed. These trends have also shaped the evolution of the Italian tax system, which remains marked by persistent mass tax evasion and a corporatised fragmentation, explicitly pursued by the current government, that results in unequal treatment. This situation is increasingly intolerable. None of this has happened by chance. Rather, it has been a fundamental contributor to the rise of inequalities within countries worldwide and to the crisis of welfare systems. To combat this situation, an international movement has emerged in recent years, and our speakers today are among its leaders. In this context, the recent re-election of Trump as President of the United States raises serious concerns. Among the first actions of the new administration is the withdrawal from the OECD agreements on multinational taxation, the proposal for significant new tax cuts for the wealthiest individuals and corporations, the abolition of the US humanitarian aid system, and a clear move toward establishing an authoritarian political system based on mass manipulation. This shift is supported by a new plutocratic oligarchy seeking monopolistic rents, undermining competition and rules, in blatant and shameless conflicts of interest. I therefore ask myself whether the efforts many of us have made in analysis, information, dissemination, and mobilization over recent years have ultimately been in vain. That is why I am very interested to hear what our speakers think about the future ahead and how we can continue our battle, which I imagine will become even more difficult. And with these rather pessimistic notes, I give the floor to our guests, starting with Professor Stiglitz, who needs no introduction. I also remind everyone that we have limited time, so in theory, speeches should last around 10 to 15 minutes, though we may allow some exceptions.
Okay, take the floor.
Well, thank you very much for this chance to share some.
Ringrazio molto per la possibilità, la ringrazio per la possibilità di condividere le mie opinioni con tutti voi. L'Italia e gli Stati Uniti stanno adesso vivendo diversi momenti di sofferenza, ma spero che siate empatici con gli Stati Uniti, perché noi dovremo affrontare molte più sofferenze di quanto non dobbiate fare voi. E noi negli Stati Uniti Abbiamo avuto modo di notare un livello di cupidigia da parte del governo che sembra essere privo di qualsiasi compassione morale, senza considerare le necessità dei poveri nel mondo. Quindi una straordinaria mancanza di compassione, di empatia. Una mancanza di preoccupazione degli interessi, delle regole di base degli stati e dei governi. Noi per 100 anni abbiamo avuto la trasparenza grazie ai principi del governo democratico. Tutto questo è stato messo in dubbio, è stato minato nelle ultime settimane. Uno degli aspetti che stiamo vedendo è l'accumulazione straordinaria della ricchezza, le economie, le inequalità economiche che si acquiscono soprattutto in mancanza di regole. Ci sono coloro che invece hanno soldi per partecipare alla politica e quindi passiamo da $1 a un voto a $1 che magari ha più peso di altri dollari, e quindi noi ciò che vediamo essere in gioco oggigiorno è proprio la nostra società, la nostra democrazia, ma anche la nostra economia. La nostra economia non funziona, non può funzionare bene quando c'è questo livello di disuguaglianze, e quindi uno degli aspetti importanti, o due degli aspetti importanti di ciò che è in corso in questo momento, è che i ricchi diventano sempre più ricchi. Questa autogenerazione, per così dire, del trasferimento della ricchezza, che crea un'oligarchia ereditaria, e noi negli Stati Uniti parlavamo della Russia come paese di oligarchi, adesso tutti parlano invece degli oligarchi americani, e questo sicuramente non in maniera positiva, non se ne parla in maniera positiva. E questo è certamente un problema e caratterizza ciò che adesso sono al comando in America. Le tasse sono uno strumento molto importante per poter correggere questo tipo di problematiche. Nessuno vuole pagare le tasse, ma così come uno dei nostri grandi giudici della Corte Suprema ha detto, le tasse è il prezzo che paghiamo per la civiltà, e io spero che tutti noi si sia d'accordo nel voler sostenere la civiltà. Ebbene, le tasse svolgono un ruolo non soltanto nel potenziare l'efficienza, e poi ne parlerò più diffusamente, perché possono certamente aumentarla se c'è una buona struttura, ma hanno anche un valore morale e creano una qualche solidarietà, un certo tipo di solidarietà, ovvero se il sistema fiscale funziona bene, si crea fiducia. Se invece il sistema fiscale è disonesto e corrotto, il risultato è esattamente l'opposto. Si mina la fiducia, si mina la solidarietà. E tutto questo è essenziale per il funzionamento di qualsiasi società democratica. Io devo usare questo termine. La rivoluzione francese ci insegna, dobbiamo avere libertà, uguaglianza e fraternità e solidarietà. Quindi noi abbiamo bisogno di questi 3 pilastri, e le tasse sono uno strumento essenziale per poter garantire tutto questo. Nel corso degli ultimi 40 anni, o 50 anni dovrei dire, i partiti di destra hanno diffuso una narrazione particolare in termini di fiscalità e di regolamentazione. La narrazione è che se si diminuiscono le tasse ed anche le regole, si può prevedere una crescita accelerata che è a beneficio o sarebbe a beneficio di tutti. Ebbene, da 50 anni abbiamo visto che questo esperimento invece è stato un grande insuccesso. E questo è un esperimento che non in un singolo paese ha avuto un risultato positivo, e quando questo esperimento si è protratto per così tanti anni e in così tanti paesi, allora il risultato è che questo esperimento è un insuccesso e bisogna porvi fine. Allora, sapete perché questo esperimento è stato un insuccesso? Perché le idee sulle quali poggiava erano errate, non c'è mai stata una buona teoria secondo la quale dare i soldi ai ricchi poi sarebbe stato a pioggia distribuito alle classi inferiori. E questo è sbagliato, perché dare i soldi ai ricchi ha fatto sì che i ricchi diventassero sempre più ricchi, sempre più volti ad aumentare la propria ricchezza senza curarsi degli altri. E quindi non c'è mai stata una vera teoria alla base di questa idea, di questo esperimento, ed anche il fatto che mercati non regolamentati avrebbero potuto portare al benessere generalizzato. Non c'è stato un presupposto generalizzato secondo il quale non c'era il potere non ci sarebbe stato il potere del mercato se ci fosse stata una buona informazione e che ci sarebbe stato un mercato per ogni rischio e così via. Ebbene, in queste condizioni il perseguimento dell'autointeresse, del proprio interesse, secondo Smith, avrebbe portato al beneficio di tutta la società, ma non così. Se noi torniamo al mio docente Canaro e al lavoro che ho portato avanti, possiamo dire che la ragione per la quale la mano invisibile è invisibile è perché questa mano non esiste, non c'è. Nell'assenza di questi presupposti estremi, quindi un'informazione imperfetta, mercati del rischio imperfetti, una concorrenza imperfetta, allora si può fare soldi meglio pensando a come ridurre il carico fiscale e ottenere maggiori profitti. Questo tipo di sfruttamento lo abbiamo visto replicarsi all'infinito. E quindi io adesso non entrerò nei dettagli di tutti i modi in cui il buon governo dovrebbe limitare e guidare i mercati. I mercati sono certamente ancora oggi una forza importante. Per cui ciò che vorrei dire è che dobbiamo regolamentare, contenere e guidare, ma c'è stata una conferenza sull'intelligenza artificiale a Parigi e poi ne parlerò. Abbiamo avuto la partecipazione anche del premio Nobel che ha inventato l'intelligenza artificiale, e questi esperti hanno detto che bisogna creare delle regole per avere un'intelligenza artificiale sicura ed equa, mentre nell'altra sala le persone che fanno soldi usando l'intelligenza artificiale stavano invece promuovendo l'eliminazione delle regole e quindi indipendentemente dai rischi, dai pericoli. Ecco quindi i vari problemi che esistono oggigiorno a proposito dell'intelligenza artificiale, ma credo che sia proprio ovvio che senza la regolamentazione il futuro del mondo sarebbe a rischio. Quindi abbiamo bisogno di regole, abbiamo bisogno delle tasse. Parleremo poi con i colleghi in maniera più estesa delle tasse. Quindi parte di questa narrazione era appunto quella di diminuire le tasse, perché e questo mi riporta a Ronald Reagan, che affermava che diminuire le tasse avrebbe portato ad un boom delle attività economiche, tanto che il gettito fiscale sarebbe aumentato, quindi diminuire le tasse per un maggiore gettito fiscale. Ebbene, una delle cose che io ho appreso nei miei lunghi anni di vita è che non bisogna mai fare una previsione così netta, perché si può essere contestati molto facilmente, e così infatti il presidente Reagan è stato dimostrato che il presidente Reagan aveva sbagliato, e noi non abbiamo mai avuto esempi che diminuendo il peso, l'onere impositivo, il gettito fiscale aumentava. E quindi io credo che questa sia proprio una finzione, l'idea di diminuire l'onere impositivo per aumentare le attività economiche. Quindi è molto sicuramente importante diminuire, dicono, le tasse, ma il governo Trump lo sta facendo per le grandi aziende e per i grandi ricchi. L'ultimo esperimento di Trump risale al 2017 in questo senso, quando le tasse per le aziende sono state diminuite in maniera significativa, e questo non ha portato dei nuovi investimenti, non ha determinato una crescita, però ci sono stati dei nuovi record, questo sì, i profitti sono aumentati, certo, perché si dava meno al governo, allo Stato, e quindi si poteva distribuire di più ai grandi azionisti ricchi, e quindi questi compravano le azioni, ed era un modo migliore così per distribuire i soldi agli azionisti senza pagare le tasse, ma non si aveva la necessità di pagare tasse sul margine che si ricavava, e dopo questa iniziativa abbiamo perso più di $1 trilione. Questi soldi potevano essere investiti per aumentare la crescita. Una delle ragioni della crescita bassa è stato proprio questa azione che ha portato a togliere i soldi dalle aziende. Quindi da un punto di vista teorico questo insuccesso non è venuto come una sorpresa. L'unica cosa che ci ha sorpreso è quanto ci è voluto perché le persone comprendessero l'analisi di questi fattori. Io ho scritto un articolo nel 1973, lo dico con un sorriso perché all'epoca ero più giovane e mi fa piacere dirlo. In quel mio articolo spiegavo che le tasse sui redditi delle aziende non diminuivano gli investimenti, e questo è un dato ovvio, perché le tasse sui profitti aziendali non sono tasse sulla manodopera. Quando si pagano le tasse si può detrarre i costi della manodopera, si possono detrarre i costi del capitale. Negli Stati Uniti anche dei macchinari, in altri paesi c'è un deprezzamento che può essere portato in detrazione nel corso di alcuni anni. Quindi in realtà si può operare questo tipo di detrazione. E che cos'è questa tassa sui profitti? È una tassa su quello che noi definiamo i redditi, e quindi questo non porta a una distorsione dei comportamenti. Si ha un cuneo perché il governo ha svolto una ricerca di base per quanto attiene per esempio la piattaforma per i vaccini, e l'AES arriva e porta i vaccini alle persone normali, e Pfizer naturalmente fa miliardi e miliardi di dollari, e quindi fanno anche moltissimi soldi queste aziende. Perché? Perché il governo ne paga i costi della ricerca, e le aziende invece godono dei profitti. E allora il governo dovrebbe riprendersi alcuni dei soldi investiti, perché il governo ha portato avanti le ricerche, ma il governo oggi è coinvolto più che mai nella creazione di una società che funziona. Perché lo sto dicendo? Perché 100 anni fa noi vivevamo in fattorie isolate e avevamo possibilità limitata di interagire gli uni con gli altri. Oggi invece noi viviamo in contesti urbani e i governi devono regolamentare le interazioni. Noi in qualche modo riceviamo l'acqua, i nostri rifiuti vengono gestiti in qualche modo, magicamente, non ci pensiamo, ma è sempre il governo che in un modo o nell'altro organizza tutto questo. E le leggi sono leggi. Guardate una società come quella americana, che cosa avrebbe fatto senza investimenti e leggi e la loro applicazione? Il premio Nobel quest'anno è stato conferito a Robert Kamen, che ha scoperto qualcosa che voi potrete definire ovvio, ovvero abbiamo bisogno di buone istituzioni, di buone leggi per garantire una crescita economica e una società che funzioni bene. E questo da dove arriva? Dal governo, deve essere in qualche modo finanziato. È ugualmente importante. Quando Adam Smith 250 anni fa scriveva, pensava proprio ad una industria, ma oggi di cosa parliamo? Parliamo dell'innovazione. L'innovazione si basa sulla ricerca di base. Quindi Musk, per esempio, si denomina un liberale e ha avuto milioni dal governo per la Tesla, per i contratti che ha sottoscritto. E dove sarebbe lui senza l'economia, senza il governo? Tesla non ci sarebbe, SpaceX non ci sarebbe, quindi Musk senza il governo non sarebbe dov'è in questo momento. Anche l'Internet è stato il risultato di base di una ricerca governativa, quindi l'innovazione, l'economia innovativa è un'economia in cui il governo, lo Stato svolge un ruolo più importante e anche i vaccini, la ricerca fondamentale è stata svolta proprio dallo Stato e tutto questo costa soldi, il che significa tasse. E spero di avervi convinto del fatto che è importante che in un'economia come la nostra le tasse sono importanti ancora più di quanto non lo fossero nei secoli che ci hanno preceduto. E se parlate o pensate alla progettazione del sistema fiscale, dobbiamo pensare anche in termini di efficienza, di equità e di progressività. Una delle ragioni che vorrei dire è che questa tassa sui profitti è molto efficiente, ma ci sono anche altre tasse altrettanto efficienti e la maggior parte di queste sono progressive. Per esempio le tasse sui terreni, sulle risorse naturali. Perché sono tasse efficienti? Se le tasse sulla manodopera sono in parte efficienti perché può darsi che la manodopera non lavori tanto quanto necessario, si può effettivamente avere forse una risposta meno soddisfacente. Ma cosa possiamo dire dei terreni? I terreni si potrebbero risentire se per esempio ci sono minori tasse? No, la terra, i terreni sono parte dell'Italia, le risorse sono italiane, non possono prendere la valigia e andarsene, quindi in questo modo queste risorse appartengono alle persone che devono essere tassate ad alti livelli. Poi c'è un'altra fonte di tassazione che in realtà ci sono casi in cui le tasse hanno reso l'economia migliore. Sembra strano, ma è vero. Le tasse sull'inquinamento. Ebbene, noi sappiamo che il cambiamento climatico è una realtà, anche se ci sono coloro che lo negano. Io chiedo ai miei studenti e dico, per me il cambiamento climatico è un grande problema, mentre Trump lo nega. Ma voi a chi credete? A me o al presidente Trump? Gli studenti mi danno sempre ragione, credono sempre a me. Quindi forse io sono nella ragione, forse ho ragione. Ma il punto che volevo fare è che chiedere tasse sull'inquinamento è un modo per disincentivare l'inquinamento. Si ottengono quindi fondi da queste tasse e al contempo si diminuisce l'inquinamento e si hanno due risultati positivi. Poi abbiamo altre tasse sull'ambiente, ci sono delle speculazioni che dicono che questo può portare ad un'economia instabile, ma non è vero, si può invece così stabilizzare l'economia e generare delle entrate erariali. Quindi in questo modo io credo che si possa dire che il sistema fiscale e le tasse rendono l'economia migliore. Adesso vorrei rapidamente, sinteticamente trattare dei contratti. Noi siamo una commissione che parla di tassazione. La tassazione è diventata sempre più difficile della globalizzazione, anzi forse è un aspetto oscuro della globalizzazione, perché la globalizzazione fornisce e offre opportunità per le aziende, per i singoli super ricchi di eludere, di evadere le tasse, si spostano nel mondo. E una delle cose che fa la nostra commissione è quella di mettere a punto delle regole che impediscano questa evasione, questa elusione, o che le rendano perlomeno più difficile. La comunità internazionale, ed è molto importante che la comunità internazionale sia unita per ridurre questo fenomeno di evasione ed elusione. Credo che i miei colleghi ne parleranno più diffusamente dicendo ciò che noi possiamo fare per ridurre questo fenomeno. Il tipo di norme che abbiamo, che risalgono all'inizio del XX secolo, non servono più il fine che noi perseguiamo nel XXI secolo. Noi abbiamo sempre perseguito un sistema che può creare, come dice l'Ocse, un minimo, ma abbiamo messo un'asticella troppo bassa al 15%, quindi anche se i paesi in via di sviluppo hanno una aliquota superiore, ma ci sono pur sempre delle eccezioni dal 12 al 13%, e questo non è accettabile. Poi c'è stata un'altra possibilità di fissare delle imposte che è stata ancora peggiore, quindi ci sono stati negoziati che adesso sono passati dall'Ocse all'ONU e dobbiamo tutti partecipare a questi negoziati. Sarà la Convenzione dell'ONU sulla tassazione e questo è molto importante proprio perché potremo cominciare a affrontare in maniera pragmatica questo aspetto. L'Europa non è stata molto cooperativa, ma senz'altro ha fatto meglio degli Stati Uniti, che in questo momento è all'estremo opposto. Tuttavia è è forse buono se gli Stati Uniti si ritirano, perché solitamente quello che gli Stati Uniti fanno è quello di diluire la forza degli accordi, di frenarli e di portarli ad un livello che poi alla fine loro diranno che non firmeranno comunque. Quindi sarà meglio avere noi un accordo più forte, tutti coloro che sono a favore di questo accordo, e io mi auguro che l'Europa si impegni in questo negoziato prossimo in maniera significativa. E quindi c'è un gruppo di tasse, adesso che siamo nel XXI secolo, e sono molto importanti. Queste sono le tasse per i servizi digitali, i servizi digitali transfrontalieri. Nel XX secolo non c'erano questi servizi, ma noi siamo nel XXI secolo e non abbiamo norme che adeguatamente regolamentano questi servizi. Abbiamo i grandi giganti digitali che producono buoni prodotti, ma sono ancora più efficaci nell'evasione fiscale. E ogni paese quindi deve avere una tassa digitale e deve avere un migliore meccanismo per poter tassare i servizi transfrontalieri. Quindi io spero che successivamente, dopo che parleranno i miei colleghi, potremo riparlarne magari con maggiore dovizia di particolari. Adesso io vorrei passare la parola alla collega.
Well, I'd like to thank Professor Stiglitz, who praised the value of taxes and importance of taxes, which is a good thing, in particular for the politicians who are here today. Because we need to be brave enough to talk about tax systems and taxes in general, because without taxes we cannot have civilization, as Professor Stiglitz underlined. So it's a sort of paradox, but here when we talk about taxes, the risk is very high of being attacked by everyone, journalists, opposers, citizens. But if we want to guarantee fair services, taxes are fundamental. But nonetheless, let's go on with our agenda. I'd like to give the floor to Professor Gosh, who is also co-chairman of ICRIT. Grazie, è davvero un grande piacere, è un grande privilegio essere qui con voi e sono onorata di essere qui. Naturalmente il professor Stiglitz ha già detto un po' tutto quello che c'era da dire, o almeno le cose principali, e quindi ha gettato le basi per quello che volevo approfondire io. Alcuni dei problemi che lui ha affrontato magari possono essere approfonditi un po', ma come dicevamo c'è stato un esperimento che è fallito, quello degli ultimi 45 anni, e non sta soltanto un esperimento fallito, ma ha creato una grande concentrazione di potere economico, la più grande concentrazione che abbiamo mai avuto, e questo è un fenomeno essenziale da considerare. Non ha semplicemente fallito, non ha rispettato le promesse, mantenuto le promesse, ma ha creato un disequilibrio di potere globalmente, e la concentrazione è nelle mani di pochissime persone, forse centinaia di persone, una cosa che non è mai successa nella storia prima d'ora, e questo ha tutte le altre implicazioni che sono state già menzionate, cioè ci dà delle grandi diseguaglianze e tensioni, conflitti all'interno delle società anche, ma ci dà anche delle economie disfunzionali, perché i tassi di investimenti sono diminuiti a livello globale. E in paesi come il mio, in India, abbiamo i tassi di investimento sono scesi sistematicamente negli ultimi 20 anni e soprattutto nell'ultimo decennio. Quindi l'unica regione è perché c'è l'investimento pubblico, quindi ci sono delle economie disfunzionali. E questo crea delle tensioni e delle conseguenze per la politica, per le società. E vediamo tutti, l'abbiamo tutti sotto gli occhi, non devo spiegarvi cosa intendo. L'odio, le divisioni che vengono coltivate nella politica, no? La cultura dell'opposizione estrema. Le tasse sono importanti per contrastare questo disequilibrio, perché supportano il contratto sociale tra le parti. Vorrei sottolineare che non parliamo soltanto delle tasse sulle persone ordinarie, ma dobbiamo tassare quelli che sono in grado di pagare, quindi quelli che sono estremamente benestanti, le grandi società, soprattutto le multinazionali, che possono, che riescono ad eludere e riescono a trovare sistemi per non pagare le tasse. Io credo che tutti noi, magari, quelli che pagano meno tasse sono quelli che sono più ricchi in realtà nel globo. Jeff Bezos, il presidente di Amazon, Elon Musk, queste persone sono ricchissime e trovano i sistemi per eludere i sistemi fiscali. Le più grandi società al mondo pagano molte meno tasse delle società nazionali. Voi avete molte PMI che sono un po' il volano della crescita economica e pagano delle aliquote fiscali molto superiori a quelle delle multinazionali. Quindi quello che cerchiamo di fare noi è quello di ridurre questa disuguaglianza e quindi fare in modo che le multinazionali, le grandi società paghino le tasse dovute per un sistema più equo. E quindi il professor Stiglitz ne ha parlato, c'è bisogno di maggiore cooperazione internazionale, non c'è bisogno di considerare le varie diramazioni delle società Apple India, Apple Stati Uniti, Apple Italia, eccetera, ma di considerare Apple in generale, di considerare un'aliquota degli utili a cui applicare le aliquote di tassazione di imposizione fiscale nazionali. È un principio molto semplice, molto base. Come il professor Stiglitz ha detto, gli Stati Uniti ha annacquato sempre di più gli accordi internazionali finché si è giunti che devono essere tassati soltanto un quarto degli utili soltanto di un numero ristretto di società, quindi insomma si è annacquato di molto il principio di base e poi alla fine gli Stati Uniti non hanno firmato, ma l'idea, il principio è estremamente importante e deve essere applicato. Analogamente i più ricchi devono pagare di più. Un'altra buona idea promossa dall'OCSE è quella di avere una tassa minima in modo che non ci sia concorrenza fiscale. C'è bisogno di cooperazione internazionale in questo tema. Quindi se c'è una disparità tra i regimi fiscali di vari paesi, le società diranno non sto in Italia, vado in Irlanda perché è più conveniente, ed è per questo che c'è bisogno di invece una aliquota fiscale minima comune a tutti i paesi, che può essere magari una media tra tutti i paesi che aggiungono a questo accordo, magari il 25%, allora non c'è concorrenza fiscale e quindi se c'è un paese in cui una società che è presente nel vostro paese può pagare meno tasse, allora la differenza viene pagata nel paese. Insomma, non c'è più un reale vantaggio nel delocalizzare la propria sede legale. Anche questo accordo è stato annacquato dagli Stati Uniti al 15%, poi l'accordo è stato chiuso al 12%, che è un po' l'aliquota applicata in Irlanda, che è la più bassa in Europa, come voi sapete. Quindi La buona notizia è che le trattative si sono spostate verso le Nazioni Unite e anche una buona notizia è il fatto che gli Stati Uniti non parteciperanno, perché quello che avrebbero fatto sarebbe stato annacquare gli accordi e poi non firmare. Per avere un risultato effettivo noi abbiamo bisogno della cooperazione di tutti i paesi. I paesi in via di sviluppo sono quelli che spingono per questo accordo, i governi africani, eccetera. L'Unione Europea non è stata così ferma nelle sue convinzioni, ma questo non è a vantaggio dell'Unione Europea, ma di soltanto alcune multinazionali che sono nell'Unione Europea e che invece vanno a detrimento dei cittadini dei paesi. E quindi è nell'interesse dei popoli europei avere questo accordo, un'aliquota minima globale. E così come è negli interessi dei popoli europei avere una tassa globale sui più ricchi, sulla ricchezza estrema. Stiamo parlando di persone che hanno miliardi di dollari, centinaia di miliardi di dollari. Nel mio paese anche 10 miliardi di dollari mi rendono estremamente ricchi, quindi parliamo dello 0,001% della nostra popolazione. Sono loro che dovrebbero essere tassate, perché non devono pagare le tasse? I loro consulenti fiscali gli mostrano tutte le scappatoie per eludere i sistemi fiscali e il G20, quindi tutti i nostri governi hanno concordato sul fatto che ci debba essere una tassa patrimoniale sui più ricchi, quindi tassare un minimo il 2% della stima dei loro utili. Poi si può parlare di patrimoniale, di tassa sui dividendi, chiamiamola come volete, ma è una tassa soltanto sulle ricchezze estreme. Se in India si tassano le società, i 1000 soggetti più ricchi, 1000 soggetti al 2%, noi otteniamo un punto percentuale del PIL, che è tutto il budget destinato dalla finanziaria in Italia per la sanità. Capite la portata? Applicando un'aliquota del 2% alle 1000 soggetti più ricchi. E quindi questa in realtà che non avvertirebbero neanche questa imposizione fiscale, si avrebbe un gettito erariale estremamente importante per il finanziamento dei servizi comuni e tutti i governi dovrebbero essere forzati a fare questo, perché altrimenti in questo modo non ci sarebbe alcun interesse per le società multinazionali di spostarsi da un paese all'altro. È difficile per i paesi in via di sviluppo fare tutto questo da soli, ma anche senza gli Stati Uniti possiamo avere tanti paesi dal nostro a bordo per questa importante battaglia. Avete cominciato a vedere l'impatto dei tagli sulla previdenza sociale, sulla sanità. Sappiamo cosa significa per le famiglie, per l'istruzione, per i bambini. Io vi posso dire che quello che si prova nei paesi in via di sviluppo è ancora peggiore, quindi in termini di tragedie umane causate dalla mancanza di risorse fiscali, nei paesi in via di sviluppo questo si sente molto di più. E questi paesi stanno spendendo 2 volte tanto per garantire la previdenza sociale, la sanità, l'istruzione. Abbiamo problemi di malnutrizione. Ci sono però degli indicatori per la nutrizione, stiamo spendendo di meno sull'istruzione, quindi questo fa detrimento di donne e bambini che puntano alla sopravvivenza in tanti paesi. E non stiamo facendo nulla per soddisfare anche gli obiettivi del clima, quindi il gettito erariale è estremamente importante, ma i paesi in via di sviluppo non possono fare tutto da soli, perché il sistema globale è molto sbilanciato, perché in questo modo non attraggono le multinazionali e quindi dobbiamo assolutamente trovare un consenso su questo tra i paesi in via di sviluppo e i paesi più avanzati per avere un accesso alle risorse di cui tutti abbiamo bisogno. Ammettiamolo, non possiamo fare affidamento sugli aiuti umanitari, non possiamo farlo più. E non voglio essere un po' brutale, come è stato fatto negli Stati Uniti quando hanno annullato USAID, l'Agenzia per gli aiuti umanitari, ma molti paesi hanno tagliato drammaticamente la propria cooperazione internazionale e quindi non riusciamo ad avere gli stessi fondi del passato e non riusciremo a stanziare i fondi necessari per soddisfare gli obiettivi sul cambiamento climatico e sulla sostenibilità. Quindi dobbiamo essere in grado di finanziare le risorse di cui abbiamo bisogno. Abbiamo bisogno di un sistema internazionale. Credo che la giustizia fiscale sia cruciale anche in Europa, in Italia, ma soprattutto a livello internazionale, perché come abbiamo detto, i paesi in via di sviluppo non possono farcela da soli. Ci si preoccupa tanto della migrazione, ma c'è molto altro di cui preoccuparsi, perché c'è un enorme potenziale di instabilità a livello mondiale legato all'impoverimento, al disagio e alle situazioni di emergenza che si stanno creando in tanti paesi del mondo. Non soltanto quindi questo è raggiungere un accordo del tipo di cui stiamo parlando non è importante soltanto per il mondo industrializzato, ma anche per i paesi in via di sviluppo. Per tutti è importante, quindi io chiedo a tutti di fare pressione a livello politico sugli interessi e sul diffondere una narrativa importante. Quindi non vogliamo tassare le persone ordinarie, vogliamo tassare i soggetti più ricchi al mondo per ridurre le disuguaglianze e provvedere alle risorse necessarie all'interno dei nostri paesi, ma anche per ridurre le disuguaglianze nell'oligarchia globale che ci troviamo a vivere. Elon Musk ha una ricchezza stimata di 42 milioni di euro e quindi parliamo di individui che detengono nelle proprie mani una ricchezza straordinaria e quindi dobbiamo preoccuparci un pochino degli interessi dei nostri paesi, delle persone, dei cittadini ordinari dei nostri paesi e delle disuguaglianze a livello internazionale. Well, what Professor Ghosh said are about international taxation of large corporations and taxation of high net worth individuals, which were questioned some weeks ago. And no one will talk about this in the United States, and so very likely those issues will be neglected also at international level. So we have a problem for European politics. If we want to reply to the new political line followed by the United States, the taxation rate is extremely significant. The rate that we at European level should do some things like avoiding having tax havens in Europe, establishing a minimum tax for high, very wealthy income in the continent, and having a taxation on multinational corporation or digital tax. And let's see what happens. I doubt that Europe will find the political majority accepting this, but the battle has to be fought on this. Because in this way, we are defending our interests, our culture, and we are trying to avoid the degeneration affecting our main ally. And I don't think that we have to have an appeasement approach. And after saying that, I leave the floor to Martin Guzman, who's been Minister for Economy in Argentina from 2019 to 2022, and he can give us some updates on what a hyper-liberal government can do, which is also a little bit eccentric, if you can say so. I'd like to know if what we heard of the saw worked or not. I thought I knew some history, and I really doubt that what has been said was true. Bene. Grazie per averci invitato. Sono veramente lieto di vedere così tante persone qui oggi a sentir parlare di tasse. Noi parliamo un po' di questo sempre in tutto il mondo, quindi se noi fossimo i Queen, Stiglitz sarebbe Freddie Mercury e io sarei quello che suona al basso, quindi cercherò di essere breve e vorremmo soltanto sottolineare 3 punti. Il primo punto è cercare di capire a che punto siamo, soprattutto nella mia regione, America Latina, cercare di capire che cosa sta succedendo. C'è stata una svolta negli anni 70, all'inizio degli anni 70, e questo ha cambiato l'organizzazione delle più grandi economie e questo ha portato a degli squilibri di potere. Dal punto di vista finanziario si è causata più instabilità finanziaria tra gli stati e il settore privato e questo ha avuto delle conseguenze anche per il sistema fiscale. Come hanno detto i miei fiscali, i dati empirici dimostrano che l'elusione fiscale è aumentata e i controlli sui flussi di capitali sono diminuiti a livello globale, quindi l'elusione fiscale è massiccia a livello globale. La conseguenza di tutto questo questo è veramente molto chiaro in America Latina, che lo Stato tassa di più le PMI perché ha meno capacità di creare altrimenti dei paradisi fiscali. Quindi quali sono le conseguenze di tutto questo? C'è una minore qualità dei servizi pubblici e quindi vengono tassate le piccole società ma non le grandi società, i cui profitti aumentano, e questo significa che lo Stato viene delegittimato. La soluzione a questo problema, per come la penso io, è, per come la vedo io, per come la vede anche l'istituto per cui lavoro, ICRIT, dove lavorano anche il professor Stiglitz e Ghosh, è quella di stabilire una architettura fiscale internazionale quelli che traggono vantaggio da questa situazione sono riusciti ad influenzare la narrativa globale e quindi hanno convinto tutto che il vero problema sono gli stati. Ma questo in realtà porta a una maggiore diseguaglianza di opportunità, di spesa nell'istruzione, nella sanità, nei servizi pubblici. Quello che stiamo vedendo ora è che la politica segue questa direzione di sbarazzarsi dello Stato, un po' come sta facendo Trump negli Stati Uniti, no? Firmando l'ordinanza, il decreto per smettere di sostenere la soluzione globale che imponeva una tassa minima sulle grandi società più ricche del mondo. Questa è una versione moderna di allontanarsi dall'idea di sviluppo, perché molte delle innovazioni sono state pagate dai contribuenti. Ora non avremmo le tecnologie di cui disponiamo se non ci fosse stata la ricerca di base finanziata pubblicamente. Quindi l'obiettivo che dobbiamo perseguire è quello che il professor Stiglitz e la professoressa Josh hanno appena spiegato. Come vi dicevo, ci sono grandi conseguenze politiche per l'America Latina. Ve ne parlo adesso un pochino dell'Argentina, come ha usato la parola stravagante, che è la parola giusta per quello che stiamo vivendo. Abbiamo un governo che ha vinto le elezioni con la promessa che avrebbero normalizzato l'economia adeguando i privilegi della casta, limitandole quindi. Ma in realtà le conseguenze sono ricadute sui pensionati, sui lavoratori. Allo stesso tempo abbiamo visto un calo dell'ammontare delle pensioni e anche della previdenza sociale. E abbiamo visto dei tagli, delle agevolazioni fiscali applicate ai più benestanti. Nel 2019 ho promosso una tassa patrimoniale e quindi si è passati adesso a un taglio dal 1,3 allo 0,25%, e tutto quindi questo ricade sulla classe media della popolazione, i pensionati, i lavoratori. C'è quindi una crescita delle diseguaglianze. Abbiamo un presidente a cui piace fare favori ai ricchi e ai potenti. Infatti Elon Musk lo appoggia e lo rende molto famoso al mondo. Però Elon Musk non sa nulla di quello che accade sul mondo del lavoro argentino, e quindi le persone non trovano lavoro quando ne lasciano uno, quando sono licenziati, e quindi devono abbassarsi a fare lavori di qualità molto inferiore in Uber o in altre società di questo genere. Quindi quello che si sta assistendo è la disoccupazione diminuisce, è vero, però c'è più scambio, c'è più debito estero, il mercato del lavoro si impoverisce, ma Elon Musk non ne parla e quindi la narrativa globale non ne viene a sapere, e quindi la popolarità del paese scende al di sotto del 50%, è sceso al di sotto del 50%. Abbiamo un governo tuttavia molto popolare. Questo ci porta a un sviluppo economico e sociale. Non stiamo dettando un esempio per altri paesi, perché non abbiamo risolto il problema dell'inclusione sociale, di creazione di grandi speranze nella popolazione. Quindi E mi muovo verso l'ultimo punto che ha a che fare con una nuova narrativa a livello politico, a livello progressista. Innanzitutto la narrativa deve iniziare con nuove azioni e la tassazione internazionale è una di quelle cause che dovrebbero essere perseguite dai governi progressisti, e sulla base della mia esperienza del 2021, quando c'erano le trattative internazionali per una tassa globale minima per le multinazionali, io ero il ministro delle finanze in Argentina, quindi ho visto quello che succedeva, ho visto anche i governi progressisti europei quello che hanno fatto, e quindi quello che ho visto è che c'è stato un approccio molto timido da parte dei governi più progressisti, e quindi quando spingevamo per una tassa al 25% per le grandi multinazionali e gli Stati Uniti premevano per il 15%, i governi progressisti non volevano assumere la leadership o lottare, erano estremamente cauti, non volevano assolutamente scontentare nessuno, soprattutto le multinazionali sul loro territorio. Questo ha creato molta delusione. Bisogna invece mantenere le persone attive quando si prendono delle posizioni forti, e se si assumono posizioni deboli non si riescono a convincere le persone, quindi c'è bisogno più audacità, più coraggio, un approccio più deciso, e la mia posizione su questo è che dal momento che le tasse sono estremamente importanti per creare una vera meritocrazia, una vera idea di libertà, nel Road to Freedom Joe ha spiegato che dobbiamo risolvere il problema della tassazione internazionale, e per farlo abbiamo bisogno di accedere a maggiori informazioni, perché se chi detiene la ricchezza sposta le sedi verso un'altra sede dove le tasse sono inferiori, questo non ci aiuterà. E dobbiamo anche informare cosa facciamo con il prelievo fiscale. Ovvero in Australia c'è stata una forma, diciamo, di campagna educativa per mostrare quello che si fa con le finanze pubbliche, ovvero finanziare il sistema di istruzione, e quindi avere un sistema agevolato per i prestiti per gli studenti, che poi potevano ripagarli dopo terminata la propria istruzione, ma a tassi agevolati. E quindi l'idea di avere un accesso alle informazioni che si associa anche alla mobilità sociale. Secondo me, quindi, noi dovremmo sfruttare di più i collegamenti per avere dei vantaggi molteplici, per invertire la tendenza in cui ci troviamo, a cui stiamo assistendo ora. Mi fermo qui.
Thank you. I believe that we have come to our coffee break, if I'm not wrong, and we will resume our works in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Allora, riprendiamo i
Now,
lavori.
ready to resume our works, and we will start with the panel totally dedicated to domestic policy. We have most distinguished speakers, Mikhail Mashanikov, an analyst on fiscal justice, Giuseppe Pizarro, full professor of tax science and also chair of the parliamentary budget office, and Mr. Andrea Roventino, who's a full professor of political economics at the Santana of Pisa, Sant'Anna University. Allow me to say that this is a very important panel because it should allow us to focus on domestic issues in the overall context of the international scenario that we have discussed earlier on this morning. We know that our system has several specificities and peculiarities that our panelists will discuss. I will start with Professor Pisauro first, then Professor Roventini, and finally I will pass the floor to Mr. Maslenikov that will wrap up the panel. So this is let's say, a pre-political sort of phase which is going to lead the way to the analysis that we will then have. Now, Professor Pisauro, you have the floor. I will talk for 10 minutes, no more, I promise, and I will go down some bullet points. So the first point on which we should start discussing Italy's fiscal tax system is what it can be traced back to what we said earlier on. That is, it's been 25 to 30 years that when we talk about the tax system in Italy, the overall narrative is we need to cut down on taxes, as Professor Stiglitz said. And this is something that occupied many energies by all of our political parties. So the tax burden in Italy in the 90s was in between 41 and 42%. And now, as of the year 2000, is 43%. In 2023, it was 42.5%, which means that the tax burden has never changed. And this has two implications. First of all, there is the need to realize that a country with a welfare system, which is rather far-reaching and with a public debt level which is very high, well, a country such as this cannot imagine to cutting down on on tax burden in any way substantially unless it wants to cut down on the welfare system, which means that any approach to the Italian tax system should be based on, first of all, redistributing the tax burden, because as we all know, there are many horizontal inequalities and also many vertical inequalities. The second point, and this is very specific to Italy, we should have a pragmatic approach to evasion, tax evasion, which is something that actually makes us stand out in comparison with other European countries. But I should also make another consideration. It is true that the tax burden today is the same as of many years ago, but the tax system has worsened quite markedly, because that narration I told you about has led to the constant research for privileges and tax cuts. Therefore, the tax burden still is 42%, but we are faced with a sort of a balkanization of our system, and there are those who earned more and who earned less, and then Professor Roventini will talk about this. Special tax systems actually mean a violation of horizontal equality, meaning treating everyone in the same manner. There are many examples I could provide you, but let's say the way that there is a difference in treating formal work and self-employed work. So the last bracket in Italy, we only includes 6% of taxpayers. If a self-employed person pays 15%, while the other pays 47% plus 3 points of taxes at the regional level. This is something totally incredible. But what would be most important to understand is that we are not simply faced with a question of equality, but it's also a matter of efficiency. There is a trade-off between equality and efficiency, as we tell our students, and they very often go hand in hand. So what is the efficiency issue? A country that has a percentage of self-employed people that is higher than in other countries. We have twice as much self-employed individuals with respect to France and Germany. And well, a country such as this cannot continuously support the widening of this area, provided that it continues to support the growth of the country. And as a result, there is a damage. There is an evident damage, and to make it more convenient, it means that it should be more convenient both for the labor force and the employers. And this is something crucial, but there are also many other examples, but I do not have that much time to actually dwell upon each one of them. But the main point that I'd like to single out is the approach to the issue, and this is a rather generalized approach, although there are rather many differences within it. So we are trying to play along with the peculiarities of the Italian system. And this is quite evident if we look at the way that we have been fighting against evasion. If we were to make a synthesis, a recap of what happened in the past 2 years, but also in the past, evasion is a very high mountain that is difficult for us to actually hike. But the whole, as to the preventive agreement, we know that an official proposal was submitted to the Parliament, and the limit is 10% more of taxable income. This was the overall idea. Now, as to the fight against evasion, I believe that much can be done, and I'd like to refer you back to the proposals footed by Nens, and they are important proposals. They can certainly be effective, and the ones that have been implemented have proven to be very effective. As to horizontal equality, a proposal was submitted by our chair that is worth reminding you of. That is an amendment to the Constitution that, together with the idea of progressivity of the system, there should also be the request for uniformity of treatment, that is horizontal equality. In Article 53 of our Constitution, this is an implicit principle, because when we read that we must all participate in public spending depending on our own ability to pay taxes, it means that we should all contribute in the same way, but this must be made explicit. And then there is also what we have been discussing here today, that is vertical equality. I really have nothing much to add to what was said already, and I believe that the following panelists will talk about an important research that says that altogether the Italian tax system is slightly progressive in terms of the distribution of income, but it's very regressive for the top 5%. Another important data that you can draw from their study is that it is regressive all throughout the distribution if you refer to wealth and not to income, to the income. So this is something that would certainly go along with the proposals that we've heard earlier on, and think in terms of setting up a tax for the high net worth individuals. And if we make an international comparison between Italy and similar countries in the West, we have a higher level of tax ability. But there is also the question of equal opportunities, something that is often mentioned. Especially the right parties talk about this. So it's not a matter of effective equality, rather of having equal opportunities. I may guarantee an equality of opportunities, but then the natural dynamics of thing will eventually generate an effective disequality. And also, this is present in the book of Professor Stiglitz, which is the Great Gatsby curve. The Great Gatsby curve actually makes a correlation between an indicator of social mobility, that is the correlation between the father and son's offspring's income, and the indicator of opportunities. This is an indicator of effective disequality, and these two things move together. And you can look at all countries and you see that all of the European countries are at the middle part of this range. On top, we have the United States, the United Kingdom, and Italy, because they have both low social mobility and a very high effective inequality. So this is something that should make us reflect more. If a country has a very low inheritance tax, obviously it's clear that redistribution cannot only be entrusted to the tax system, also the welfare system is involved. And once again, the absence of a network of last resort network of safety, this is something that should be kept at the center of our discussion, because the tax system cannot cover the whole of the amount of people that have no income to declare. So we should have tools to really fight against poverty, and such a tool should be different from what we had in the past. The very last question that regards international issues such as tax havens and multinational corporations. Well, I will take up 1 minute of your time to talk about Professor Mordecai Kurtz's work that was published a year ago, and that refers to the market power of technology. Professor Kurtz says that the very high growth of monopolistic wealth for multinational corporations in the United States, and Kurtz, as you know, is a professor at Stanford. So the monopolistic wealth that he has estimated against versus the total amount of the market value of capital companies in the States in the 90s was about 0%. Now it is up to 70%. And this, once again, is a topic which is very important. According to Professor Kurtz, what we have been discussing here today, that is the increase in inequalities and so on and so forth, well, all of this is associated with technological innovation in a way similar to what happened at the end of the 19th century. At the time it was the railways, now we have information technology, and also the growth in monopolistic welfare. Thank
you. Now, I'd like to emphasize a couple of aspects on what Pisauro just said. First being the reference to Article 53 of the Constitution, which was a sort of succession for me in the past. If you look at the archives of the Chamber of Deputies of the 80s, well, you will find a proposal I advanced on this issue, which is a priority, in my opinion. The principle of progressiveness is just an indication, it's not absolute. But this would be a constraint, so that every time provision is passed at the Parliament, there is somebody introducing tax benefit, a tax cut, and this is a disaster. Second issue, when Mr. Pisauro referred to the threshold of €85,000 of profits for the beneficial tax treatment. Well, that's an indication, because we know that those taxpayers evade 65–68% on the average of their income. So it means that €85,000 are €300,000 in reality. And if you make simple calculations with the same income, there is a difference in taxation on income of €80,000 per year. So please consider this. Now, Professor Roventini will explain us better. I think that some of these results are even too optimistic. So, and the fact that there is a slight progressiveness and proportionality is a good thing. Well, yes, we live in a world characterized by a huge flat tax. I have to apologize because I have some slides, and I apologize with our foreign guests because I'm speaking Italian. Well, Joe Stiglitz explained why it's wrong to decrease the tax burden. Now I want to tell you why we have to increase the tax burden, because it's nice, but not to everyone, just to the wealthiest. I'd like to convince you on this, because this is fair and effective. Let me check the slides, okay? So, if we look at the development of inequalities in Italy from the 80s onwards, what you can see is that the part of the income which is distributed to the wealthiest, which is the blue line, 1% richest or the 0.1 wealthiest, which is the orange, the red one, you can see that the inequality increase pace is incredibly high, and the 50% of the poorest population is experiencing a decrease in their income. Same can be done for the wealth, in the sense of possessions. If there is inequality in income, well, in wealth we have the same situation. 1% of the wealthiest in Italy holds 25% of the national wealth, and this is a growing trend. And then we have the 50% of the poorest experiencing a decrease of their wealth. Italy is also a particular problem. Our economy is in stagnation, and so we have reached the pre-crisis level, the pre-2008 crisis level, and those who were more affected was where the 50% poorest citizens of Italy. So what could we do? Well, in theory, this inequality could be corrected with a tax system, as we've heard previously. With this research that we did in the Sant'Anna University, we analyzed the effective tax rate that the Italian taxpayers are paying, and we summed all the income and all the types of taxes which are levied. And as Vincenzo said, what we found is that our system is a huge flat tax system, so the tax rate is constant in time. But if we consider the 5% wealthiest, so the last part of the graph, you can see that there is a decrease, and so the wealthiest in Italy are paying an effective tax rate which is inferior to the rest of the population. So the system appears to be regressive, a sort of inverted Robin Hood. If we move on to wealth, the system is regressive all the same, because the wealthiest in Italy hold more capitals and more income. So we have a system which is totally opposite to our constitution, which is envisaging a progressive tax system. We made another survey and we calculated how to correct the system. And so those are the systems which are used as models of optimal taxation, as models responding to the resistance to the increase of taxes that we often find in newspapers, and they take into consideration the answer of taxpayers. So if we increase taxes, taxpayers can try to avoid taxes. So these scenarios take into account all this. We designed scenarios to correct regressiveness. What we found is that our system is even worse of what emerged in the graphs I showed you. And so it's regressive from the top 7 of the wealthiest population, because they have an income or yields from their investments which are superior to the rest of the population. And so the rest of the population obtain yields between 2.5 and 3%, and the top 0.1% of the population has yields of 5%. And the 0.1 top wealthiest individuals pay, on the average, 32%. and the difference is huge. Then we calculated some reforms that could be introduced, and what is interesting is that these reforms can correct the system, but we can move from regressive to a progressive system. They reduce inequalities, and they also increase the revenues, tax revenues. And so they respond to the arguments of those who are against the increase of taxes. Taxes shouldn't be applied on middle classes, but only on the wealthiest ones. Well, what can we find? If we want to tax income and capital, 0.1% of the wealthiest should pay a tax rate of 60%. It can appear very high, but it's not. Similar studies in the United States have very higher tax rates. In the 50s, under President Eisenhower, the higher tax rate was 93%, just to give you an idea of how times changed. If we tax just the capital, well, we would tax the capital by 60%. And then tax on wealth. If we would levy a tax on wealth, which only on the wealthiest individuals, we would obtain the same results that I told you before. So with a tax rate of 0.1 for top 7%, or 1.3 for top 1.3%. I'll skip the chart because it's not very clear, but I'd like to conclude with this graph. Well, you can see the tax revenues of different types of tax on wealth. If we had a very light tax on wealth, in line with the proposal advanced by Gabriel Zucman at the G20 in Rio de Janeiro this summer, so 20% on the 1% of the on all millionaires, Italian millionaires, we would obtain a tax revenues equal to 3.2 billion euro. If you think of the debate in Italy on how to reduce tax rates for the middle class, or where to find resources to finance health, or how to find resources without having wild budget tax to university and research, well, a very light tax on wealth in line with the proposal advanced at G20 could be the solution and could contribute to improve the Italian situation. If we want to tax more the wealth and just 1% of the wealthiest, it's a population holding more than 1.7 billion euros. So there is margin in Italy to levy a tax on wealth on the richest ones to reduce inequalities.
Certainly it is quite interesting to understand what will happen if you consider the tax on corporations. What would be the capital? Well, we also consider the non-distributed profits, as Zucman and as other research studies also discuss. So it's a matter of taxing what the eventual yields and returns will be. So we will now pass the floor to our last panelist, Thank you. If this is to be considered a pre-political panel, I am the pre-political panelist. The contest that Professor Pisaura and Valentini described provides us with a snapshot of a country that actually suffers a basic violation of tax democracy. That is, it is always the same ones that pay taxes and services. They do correspond to social rights such as education and health that are certainly not well budgeted and constantly suffering cuts. And these are also services and goods that certain taxpayers benefit from without paying the right taxes. We see the fragmentation of our fiscal system in many different approaches, and this clearly is the breaking down of the social contract. So what do we have? We have many different social contracts between the state and different taxpayers, and who would you say that gets the best treatment? Probably the ones that pertain to the voters of the party in power. It is obvious that we have many different inequalities in our system. In terms of vertical inequalities, Andrea and his co-workers have shown that we live in a country where the richer taxpayers pay much less than the ones paid by either a professor, teacher, or a nurse. This is unacceptable, and I believe that our constitution actually should be referred to. Then we have horizontal inequalities. Well, it is a principle of fiscal and tax civilization, that of making sure that taxpayers would not have different tax systems. But this is something that is constantly violated by our system. We have generous cuts for self-employed people and other privileges that still exist. Inequalities are not only identified by research studies, but they are also quite clear to our citizens. We carried out polls some years back, and it was quite clear that inequalities were clearly perceived by all citizens. It was quite clear that the inequalities were very strong between different groups of citizens, and also voters of right parties realize it. And to recover tax democracy in our country is not a mission of our government, that is promoting a tax reform in the name of the overall idea of decreasing taxes for all, without at the same time providing a clear model that would increase our tax system. So we do not see any right fight against evasion and tax avoidance. All of these reforms should be self-funded, but our government actually exacerbates differentiated tax systems. And since we have been talking about tax evasions, we see that the government is encouraging encouraging very opportunistic behaviors, and we are very concerned about it. And as Professor Stiglitz said in his speech this morning, that is the denigrating narrative about taxes and fiscal systems and the role that they play in supporting the economy and society as a whole, especially to the benefit of the most vulnerable brackets of our society. I would say that this narrative is denigrated by those who says I'd rather support philanthropy or a constant kind of tax war with the citizens. But our citizens have proven that they disagree. Citizens ask for an overall rebalancing of the tax system and more and higher tax rates for those that are at the top of the pyramid. And as Professor Stiglitz said, I believe that progressive forces should be very critical about this subversive narrative, and we call on the need to express clearly the need for more equity. This morning's panel reminded us that we need to have a stronger tax cooperation at the international level. We have to face up to the challenges of digitization. We should be aware and fight against evasion and avoidance, and also consider the need to increase tax rates for those that have benefited greatly from this system. We have many different proposals put forth by Nens, by the OECD, and also the Tax the Rich manifesto that was developed together with the University of Pisa, Sant'Anna, and the Bicocca in Milan. But we are also talking about the equality of opportunities, also the system of the inheritance tax. When we talk about European tax evasions, well, we are a tax haven for inheritance taxes, and there is the infrastructures. There are the infrastructures that allow for the transfer of funds. So this agenda that we should have is most important. In 2024, the international community made the first steps forward, and this will stay on the G20 agenda in 2025, and we will keep it quite focused also within the UN as to the Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. Let me just conclude by saying that we should remind us all of how important it is to constantly fight against evasion, but also reporting on any sort of tax amnesty. We must continue to report such actions because they denigrate equality in the tax system, and we should also counter pathological situations when we citizens, when needing money, we go to the bank system and pay very high rates. And obviously, this does not happen to those that are at the top of the tax system, and I think we should continue to fight for equity and to make everybody aware of the need for a stronger tax justice. Thank you.
Now we are approaching the political aspects that now we can address with the three leaders of the opposition parties. Well, here there is a podium where you can talk from. I propose to move on in alphabetical order if you agree. So we will have
Allora, ma io richiamavo, io richiamavo lì, ma insomma, sì. No, gli ha detto si va per... Allora, cominciamo. Allora, comincerei allora con Giuseppe Conte.
I would start from Giuseppe Conte. Thank you. Thank you. I followed with great interest the speakers before me. I'd like to make a joke as for what Professor Stiglitz said when he said the situation in the United States is worse than in Italy. Well, I'm very much concerned by the executive orders by President Trump and by the emerging positions from these initiatives. Because what emerges is a Colbert-driven economy which could start a recession spiral with tariffs and duties, from which we'll all be losing. But what I'm most concerned about is politics in Europe and in Italy. Here in Italy, we lack a political vision because the President of the Council of Ministers and the Minister of Economy do not have a political vision. We do not have an economic vision we can debate. So we are passively assist to what is happening without having any political debate, and we have terrifying data. We are experiencing 36 months of decline in manufacturing, and this is a tragedy. Last December was minus 7% of manufacturing, of industrial production. We had 5,700,000 people living in absolute poverty conditions, and 30% increase of layoff fund. And we also have a category association who are not saying anything. They're just passive spectators. And this is very concerning. And what is even worse is that we are experiencing an anti-European narrative because the data at European level are not less concerning. We launched a pact of austerity and growth, which is moving us back to austerity. And whereas we had expansion politics also during the hard time of pandemic, and we had a GDP increasing by 15% between 2021 and 2022. We, with the governments which I had the honor to chair, we created the Next Generation EU program, expanding investments.
Mi fregio anche rispetto a quel che è stato detto prima di aver realizzato sotto il mio governo.
Under my government, we had the most effective redistribution policy that we had in Italy, because we put 9 billion euro and we distributed to the 1/10 of the poorest population. So what's the scenario we are experiencing? I'm very much concerned because I'm following what happens, and I'm following what you just described, and I totally agree on the increasing inequalities. But I believe that the problem, and you also said that, is a problem of democracy. It's not just a problem of unequal or unfair policies. We are experiencing a democratic emergency, and so we never had such a concentration of power, of political power, of wealth and technocratic power. So if you consider three individuals, three Vanguard, Late Locke and State Street, they are holding 1/5 of the global GDP in terms of bond liquidity, and they have crossed securities. They hold securities of their rating agencies. Well, that's concerning. And what Lucy Babachak from Harvard and from the Boston University certified that if we still go on like this by 2038, they will control 40% of the voting rights of the Standard and Poor 500. And this has to do with the quality of democracy, because who's having the power now? The governments. What kind of power do they have? And if you add the big tech companies, well, let's not, when we have a democratic debate, let's not forget that the power is exercised through the finance-led mechanisms of economy. It's a power that we do to them, but not through elections, because our personal savings is ours, and they act on personal savings. And as for the big tech companies, I totally agree on the development of capitalism. It's not just a movement towards finance. It's not just an opaque layer on democracy. I could mention 1,000 of examples. Recently, the Central Bank of the United States abandoned the alliance built in 2017, the network for greening the financial system. And the day after, the CEO of BlackRock did so. So there was a sort of synchronous synergy. So they all abandoned all the programs regarding the net zero strategy, the Green Deal strategies. And I could mention many other examples. So these groups are accumulating profits. The arms sector, well, the wars are decided by governments or by the industry of weapons, of firearms. Well, I think it's a problem of democracy and the quality of democratic dialogue. With the big tech companies, we have something which is even more pervasive because they control our existence. They are holding the digital media. They are implementing monopolistic and unfair practices. Have you seen what happened to a company, DeepSeek, with 250 researchers was trying to alter and the market? Well, it was attacked and carried away from many sectors of the market. Well, this is a political argument. Economy is the priority, and politics is ancillary to economy. And maybe we also have a political responsibility. We are not aware of this. With capitalism of surveillance, we are evolving towards a new form of capitalism, a capitalism which is exacerbating a dimension which I call a parasite mechanism. There is the economists make a differentiation between generational value and exploitational value. But for me, those who exploit value are parasites. So the meritocracy will. What kind of merit can you find in the circulation of finance, of capital that you never own, it's never yours, and you increase wealth by doing nothing, step after step? What's the merit in having states, as you teach us, as you tell us, investing in the digital technologies? Because otherwise we wouldn't have any innovation. Electric cars, we had investment on electric cars made by states. No one else would have invested on that. And I think that we should be aware of what we have ahead of us. So new forms of capitalism that, thanks to the oligopoly and the monopoly and the finance-driven mechanisms, they get richer and richer. There is a concentration of wealth and power and technological knowledge, which is creating a serious problem. Well, when I have Elon Musk in the government, well, there is not even more a conflict of interest in the States. The United States, there is a debate with the Ministry of Economy about the data bank he can access or not. So Elon Musk is in the power rooms and could have a competitive advantage accessing all the data of his competitors. So this is madness completely. How can we? What's the solution? I think that we should strengthen democracy before addressing tax policies, because if we not tell the citizens what's going on, well, we are addressing the issue in a traditional way. Well, there is an inequality in the system, but you cannot say you need a tax on the wealthiest. You need to explain to citizens how wealth is being accumulated, the new form of capitalism. We need to explain the mechanisms so that we have privileged and exploited citizens. And democracy, it cannot hide all this, because we are going much beyond inequality of opportunities. And so I conclude by saying the morning was very full of interesting speeches, but I think that we have to work on a global level to introduce forms of taxation which can fight and these new forms of capitalism. We have to do so in a smart way at a global level. When I was president of the Council of Ministers, in the 3 years of government, I had a real I really understood what are the problems of a premier has to govern the country. As Ulrich Beck said, the problem of politics is not what it used to be in the past, the fear of being invaded by multinational corporations. What used to be the argument in the 70s or the 80s of last century. Now the fear is that of not attracting the investors enough. So they don't like because they can find better regulatory regimes. That's what happened with Amazon in Texas, where in the factory the employees asked for a wage increase, and so Amazon closed the factory and moved elsewhere. So what kind of political power do we still have? We exercise political power only at a global scale, or at least at European scale. That's why the Commission, the Commission of the European Parliament, in imposing a tax levy on multinationals at European level. But this is not enough, because I was faced with CEOs and entrepreneurs that, faced with threats, they told me, well, tomorrow morning I can move my factories, I can leave the country, and I don't need to go far. I just go to Eastern Europe, where I was proposed a tax comfort zone for 5 years. So the problem is that once attracted, they don't remain if they don't have benefits in remaining. So we need to fight all this at a global level. The global minimum tax is, of course, very welcome. 15% is not much, but it's at least something. As for the digital tax, well, yes, absolutely, we have to press and to push at European level, because we have to find an agreement on that. And we also need to fight and oppose any individualistic pressure, as Professor Garsh said, because we need to work in terms of opposing tax avoidance and tax evasion with non-traditional instruments which are much more effective. Thank you.
Bene,
I do not believe that I should make any comment on politicians' considerations, and therefore I would like to pass on the floor to Mr. Fratoianni. Thank you, Mr. Visco, and I'd like to thank you all the organizers of this most important conference, and please, I'd like to extend my thanks to the speakers, all of them, and as you can imagine, we are used to discuss daily on just about everything. So to have an opportunity to reflect, ponder, and exchange opinions as we're doing today is a great opportunity. And I would also like to thank you, Mr. Visco, because considering people like me from my political side of the political spectrum, it's like a feeling that all of a sudden you have landed in paradise. It's a way of paying back, so to say, because for many years in a country such as ours, there was this term that is wealth tax that for many years was considered a taboo, and that was instead said out loud, and it's at the center stage of the political battle, not simply because it is absolutely right and it's a good means to start correcting these many inequalities we see today in our world. But those who fought that political battle, and I'm still convinced about it, and especially now that I've had the opportunity of listening to the many speakers that we hosted here this morning, but simply because the challenge that we are facing up to is a situation that has many dynamics that attach meaning to the public reasoning. Mr. Visco said this morning that the International Right Party has developed a toxic narration about taxes, trying to convince everyone that taxes should be decreased without giving specific explanations. And as Professor Stiglitz said, cutting down on taxes for the wealthier is based on the idea of dripping down from the top to the people at the bottom. But this, as Professor Stiglitz said, is a major failure. And as a result, allow me to talk to my friends and colleagues, also from the opposition, to say that that toxic narration that toxic narrative was so strong because it actually was able to thrive on a subordination of many of the forces that should have provided an alternative, or else we would not explain why in a country such as ours we cannot talk about certain things, and why a person like Mr. Visco, when he was in the government and when in the protest of the right-wing parties he was depicted as a vampire, he was rather timidly supported and defended, because the issue of taxes actually has a strong problem of subordination. It is still nowadays very difficult for us to organize an idea of an alternative. But I would say that today this is certainly necessary, because it entails the role of politics in the economy. And as Giuseppe just reminded us about, we have a capitalist structure that has become all the more complex. If the owner of PayPal, one of the richest men in the world, says that capitalism and freedom cannot coexist anymore, then you understand which one of the two words should be thrown out into the wastepaper basket. That is freedom, certainly not capitalism. But I do believe that we should do exactly the opposite, and that statement is very worrisome. Or else the discussion that we are promoting on power and all that is related to it, and what certainly is focused on some people around the world, then it will stay on the surface. And this is why why I believe that when faced with such a situation, even the mechanism by which wealth is generated and accumulates, and this mechanism has greatly changed. So we must be able to define a radical alternative. This is the ground on which we must act, because if we have no alternative, we are doomed to lose, not simply as regards the effectiveness of taxes, but also the defense of democracy and its function. There is no democracy unless it is able to give back the role of the state in the field of the concentration of powers. And I believe that we must find an alternative. This is what we have to concentrate on. We must act at the international level, and Europe is actually betting on this, its own future, especially now. There has been an acceleration following Mr. Trump's election. We are weak, but we are also a rather large market that should be of interest to Mr. Trump as well. So either Europe is able to become a leading actor and take a step forward as to the minimum tax rate on multinational corporations, and this should also be promoted by our own Prime Minister in the program for the latest general European election of Brothers of Italy's, and we will remind our Prime Minister about it, because the program said that the minimum tax rate on multinational corporations should be relaunched. So we should all unite and support this, because this goes in defense of our interests, but also in the interests of Europe. So we must find a way to set up an international continental alliance, and this has to be associated with tax policies and the tax brackets for the wealthiest. But there's also a very domestic issue that we must face up to. We must make a proposal for an alternative. And as Mr. Aventini said, we should have a wealth tax. And this is just about the time. We cannot continue to postpone it. We must make it effective. We can and we should be open to discuss about everything, but the main core is the wealth tax, but also inheritance tax. We know that we have a very low inheritance tax, lower than what it is in the rest of Europe. And also, as we saw with the figures that were given to us, we have a rather regressive tax system. And this is quite obvious also if we see it from the point of view of income, and we see regressive effects all over. So an alternative to right-wing parties that have actually built their narrative on that also. They did the same as far as migration is concerned. So we should break free of a subordinate role and face up to these risks and threats, and it is high time for us to act. Thank you.
Helly Schlein, you have the floor. Good morning to you all. Thank you for giving me this opportunity for a dialogue. I'm very happy of what I've just heard this morning. I'd like to thank all those who organized this event. I'm very glad to be here with Giuseppe and Nicola. And I have this hope. It's important that we are here together, but it's not about us, it's about them. We are today with the top experts on this aspect, in this sector. So it's just that we are the finger, and today you showed us the moon. So we can just talk about the political level. And I'd like to start by what you told us this morning. I totally agreed on what you said. The economic system and the economic model of last 30 years moved income from labor to capital, to finance. The wealthy people got richer, the middle class got impoverished, those who were poor are now experiencing extreme poverty. So the dogma of the market self-regulating has failed. I liked hearing Stiglitz saying that the invisible hand is invisible because it's not there. You said that the high tide can raise all boats, the small ones, the big ones, but it's not true. As Stiglitz wrote, the high tide raised just the big yachts, but caused the wreckage of all the smaller boats. So we are experiencing a period in which the wealthiest are paying less taxes than the workers. As Professor Gosh said, the economic growth is concentrated in the hands of a few, and the families, the households, have worsened their life conditions. This has caused mistrust towards democracy, politics, and institutions. There is an interesting study showing that in the places where welfare was cut, Raventini is nodding, there is more inclination towards voting for nationalistic right-wing parties. There are those who cut, but there are those benefiting by the weakening of the social fabric as a result of the cuts that were implemented, and we should reflect on that. As you all emphasized, we are experiencing a world where the concentration of power and of wealth, of data, of technologies is unprecedented in history. This is true and this is easy to understand for technology, but the problem is those who are left behind. Because this concentration is jeopardizing the quality of democracy and the social mechanisms and the democratic mechanisms. We can see it in the United States and in many other sectors. There is a link between the national right-wing parties, so a very strong message, and a techno-capitalism which is particularly aggressive. We have seen this in the alliance between Trump and Musk. It's the idea that we cannot share that if you're wealthy enough, you can buy everything. You can buy the political system, you can buy democracy, you can organize lotteries and offer 1 million to those voting for your candidate. You can buy judges. If there is no such principle as justice is the same for everyone, well, there is no right in democracy for nobody, because Italy is not immune. Well, and there was a dramatic increase in inequalities in the last years. Social mechanisms towards up are blocked, and our tax system is regressive. So it's privileging the wealthiest at the detriment of the rest of the population. So it's not just flat, because flat tax is so much spoken about. But when the income tax was established, we had 32 tax rates. Now we have 3. So we already had a flat system almost, but now it's progressive. And I'd like to quote some passages from Stiglitz. This powerful message that if I cut taxes also to the wealthier, and if I remove any sort of regulation, I will get growth, which will be redistributed automatically. This is what was attempted in the last 30, 40 years. It failed. It failed everywhere, and it's absurd that we are still talking about this, and we have to prove that this right, even with new faces, is proposing old recipes which have already failed on the life of citizens. And this failure, as Professor Stiglitz said, he referred to Pfizer, talking about multinationals producing vaccines during pandemic. Well, I think that during the pandemic something happened. So we started to rediscover the irreplaceable role of the public entities. Mr. Conte was president of the Council of Ministers, and he will remember the efforts put in finding places in the intensive care units. And we didn't rely on the private sector. So during the pandemic, we rediscovered the role of the public entities. We went beyond the European bands, and we adopted the Next Generation EU program with public European investments. And just after a few years, instead of following that direction, the right parties are struggling to go in the opposite direction. And I think it's important to have this perspective in mind when he says that the public research, that the base research is public. He's saying something extremely important, and we should support a proposal advanced by Forum Disuguaglianze e Diversità. So the idea that there is a European public research center on life, essential drugs and on vaccines, so that with base research is not funding private extra profits. So we should act on these principles. We need to also to talk about conflict of interest. I know that Movement 5 Star has advanced a proposal, but unfortunately it was the right parties are trying to destroy this proposal. But we have to be critical towards ourselves, because if the right parties have this strength, well, we must wonder if we should have addressed the conflict of interests more. So we have Elon Musk participating in the government and trying to acquire the most powerful company in the sector of AI. So we need to promote a law in Italy, but we move on a global scale because the same rules should be applied everywhere to avoid economic infiltrations in democracy and in politics. As for tax system, at international level, we have been working with Misha on this. Professor Ghosh said that humanitarian aid is not enough. It's true. The problem is that the African Union has proven that in the last 50 years they received the same amount of development cooperation aids, which is equal to illicit financial flows. So $1,000 million. So with one hand you give money, on the other hand, with corruption and bribery and tax avoidance, you take. Just in Europe, it has been estimated we have 700-800 billion euro of tax avoidance, tax evasion in the European Union, because we have 27 different tax systems which are competing one against the other. This is unacceptable. What's the solution? Well, one is very dear to the person sitting next to me. It's called CCCTB. It's Consolidated Common Tax Base Agreement. It means that tax have to be paid where the profits are made. So we have to carry on with these proposals at European level, strengthen the international exchange of information, as was the request by the OECD. Strengthening the country-by-country reporting. So even in developing country, if a company is going there, it has to report data on labor, on profits, because if we have tax information exchange just at European level, companies will move elsewhere in the developing countries. So we have to work a lot at international level, and we should work on a couple of issues at European level, the most significant one being overcoming unanimity on tax regulations, because in this moment the smallest state can veto important proposals. So now that the United States left some international fora, we can be more ambitious. But would like to see my government, the Italian government, allied with Donald Trump at the detriment of honest Italian taxpayer. And I close with the international scenario. On the national scenario, well, at national level, the tax system is totally unfair, and I agree with the proposal of having horizontal equality in the Constitution, even, because it says that the more you earn, the more you pay. It cannot depend on the type of work that you do or the kind of job that you have, because this system is such that in Italy it's more economically viable in renting a garage than having a company, than owning an enterprise, and this is unacceptable for those who have the Constitution at heart. So I totally approve horizontal and vertical inequality. We have to fight against tax evasion because this government has weakened the fight against tax evasion and had more than 20 tax amnesties, raised the use of cash threshold. And I invite you to use this time at the opposition to reflect on how to modify this tax system, which is so unfair and so not equal. Intervening on the wealthiest individual is not a taboo, but I'd like to have a taxation on the wealthiest at European level, on a minimum level, so at least at European level, but we have Trump attacking multilateralism, and he's not the only one. So it's good to have this dialogue at European level at least, because the capital is extremely volatile at the moment. So for me, it's more effective to act at that level, but I'm open to discuss it in different occasions. I think that this issue cannot be considered a taboo. So a taxation on the high net worth individuals, we would like to support the proposals advanced by Lula in Brazil. And you also told us that in the United Nations, negotiations should be conducted on tax systems. The discussion started in G77 and I know very well that this discussion is so important despite Trump trying to destroy the United Nations, because otherwise we won't be able to solve the problem of tax havens in Europe, but we will move the problem towards African countries, and we shouldn't do that because this would contribute to more inequality in the rest of the planet. This is not our objective. In order to do so, we need to have a clear vision, pragmatical solutions, but even more, we need to have progressive powers really implementing those programs, which are not too shy and which are not moving backwards. So the question is, are there forces to move some of these steps together? I can tell you that the Democratic Party is here and is available.
Here we have come to the end of our conference, but I believe that if you agree, we can stay for an extra 15 minutes so to give you an opportunity to pose questions, if any. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question?
Molto meno. Chiedo scusa, io volevo fare una domanda.
I would like to pose a very specific question. Certainly, we're talking about major wealth to be transferred. However, I see a major difference of treatment also between middle, high wealth and the people with no income whatsoever. Before the budget law, at the end of last year, the Ministry of the Economy released a document saying that tax cuts were to be seen as measure that could undermine the Italian tax system. So well-off people, a well-off individual can deduct his or her health expenditure, while a person who has no income certainly does not have this opportunity. So is there a chance to actually correct this, or would it be possible to change this tax cut system with something different that could be applied to everyone, but on an equal level? That is, it should be the same amount for everyone. Thank you for this question of yours. What you have been referring to is of the utmost importance. We spoke earlier about the need for Italy to have a tool to counter poverty. Giuseppe reminded us of the minimum wage tool that was actually replaced by today's government with tools and measures that do not have the same impact and not the same resources. So we need to come up with a measure to fight against poverty. And certainly, I believe that we, at the time, helped over 2 million households not to fall into poverty. I'm always very careful, but I'm always very willing to analyze data and obviously the tax system. But I agree that we should give everyone the same thing. And if we do it, but we should be careful about this, because we should find a way to set up a more equitable tax system, more generalized, capable of doing away with today's privileges and make the system easier for citizens to understand it. So we need a new tax pact based on the principle of progressivity, according to which those that are wealthier should pay more, and then the horizontal equality, that is, whatever you earn should be the basis on which you must work out your tax rate. So if we want to lower taxes on labor, and we know that labor taxes are high, but if you do not want to cut on the welfare system, then we have to find a way to do it. So what we are talking about is the super wealth, not the middle brackets of our society. So besides focusing on distribution and redistribution, we should concentrate on pre-distribution. That is, we should try and avoid that inequalities be handed down from one generation to another. And this is what you said. Why is it that taxes are important? We heard why from our speakers this morning. And if the health system were to continue to work well, we would be in a good position. But now, both the health and the education sectors are suffering major cuts. So we must focus our attention on these welfare systems. And if we talk about redistribution, then we should talk about the invoices, the bills that we must pay. And yesterday, the Prime Minister said maybe it was a mistake to actually change entirely the system that controlled the bills. And Orsini from Confindustria said that we should decouple the gas price from the price of renewable energies. And this is what we have been saying all these months. So it is absurd the way that we actually fix energy prices in Italy. We are all in agreement that we should tax the extra profits of major companies, especially during the energy crisis. But if you decouple and you redistribute from the very beginning the benefits of the renewable energies, then we would not have to deal with extra profits. These are the two faces of the same coin. So thank you. This is what we should be dealing with.
Grazie innanzitutto a tutti per questa bellissima mattinata. C'è un allarme che vi devo riportare anche qui a questo tavolo.
Thank you for this very interesting morning. I believe that progressive parties in Europe are focusing on this agenda, what Professor Stiglitz said this morning, and what we heard is our agenda in Europe, and this is what we want to be committed to, our progressive forces in Europe. But there is a simple issue, that is progressive forces should be taken into consideration within the European Commission and the position of the Popular Party in Europe that is gradually supporting right-wing parties. These shift of the Popular Party towards the right-wing parties that are within the Commission will bring about the failure of this agenda, and this should be clearly understood by us all. So progressive forces should understand that the Popular Party is now shifting to the right and to favor Trump and Musk. It will make the global minimum tax fail, as well as the BFID project. So this is the principle that we have been footing in Europe, and also tax harmonization. We keep on saying that multinational corporations are multinational corporations, but that we want to look at our own domestic tax systems. But this is wrong. It's a contradiction. So how do we deal with domestic tax systems and how these big companies work at the transnational level, at the international level? So while the political dynamic in Europe is developing along this line after this first period of the von der Leyen Commission activities, there is a step back, and we must be aware of it, because that is not the way to go forward. Not the von der Leyen Commission is the way to support our agenda. If we continue to say that the wealth tax should be developed in Europe, well, with this current Popular Party in Europe, it will not be possible. Thank you. Thank you. We have come to the end of it. Thank you.